My own son left me at Denver International Airport with nothing but the clothes on my back and 37 years of bitter disappointment. I watched his taillights disappear into the Colorado darkness, taking my wallet, my phone, and apparently what was left of my dignity. That's when the old man with the silver-tipped cane approached me and said the words that would change everything. "I'll give you $5,000 to pretend to be my son for one evening. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me backtrack and tell you how a 62-year-old former construction foreman ended up sitting on a bench outside Terminal B, wondering if this was rock bottom or just another stop on the way down. My name is Frank Morrison, and 3 hours earlier, I thought I was flying to Seattle with my son Derek to visit his new apartment. Derek had called me 2 weeks prior, all excited about his promotion at some tech startup. "Dad, you gotta see this place," he'd said. "Finally got that corner office with the mountain view." I should have known something was off when he insisted on driving me to the airport instead of meeting me there. Derek hasn't done anything thoughtful for me since his mother died 8 years ago, when his daughter Emma was just 2 years old. But hope makes fools of us all. And I was hoping this trip might repair whatever had broken between us after the funeral. Derek was 34 now, trying to balance single parenthood with a demanding career after his ex-wife Linda had moved to Oregon with Emma. He got to see his daughter every summer and alternating holidays, but the distance was killing him financially and emotionally. The drive from Colorado Springs to Denver usually takes 2 hours. Derek spent most of it on work calls, apologizing to clients about delayed projects while I watched the prairie roll past. Every few minutes, he'd glance at me in the rearview mirror like he was checking to make sure I was still there. "You nervous about flying?" he asked during a rare break between calls. "Been flying longer than you've been breathing, son." "Right, of course." He fumbled with his phone. "Sorry, work's been crazy since the promotion." Work was always crazy for Derek. Had been for 3 years, ever since Linda left him and took Emma. She'd claimed Derek was never around, always working late, always choosing career over family. Derek had thrown himself into 60-hour weeks rather than deal with the divorce and the pain of seeing his daughter only on holidays. I understood that kind of pain. When Derek's mother, Sarah, passed from breast cancer 8 years ago, I'd done the same thing. Buried myself in construction projects until my body gave out and forced me into retirement 2 years later. At the airport, Derek parked at the curb instead of in the garage. "I'll help you check in," he said, but he was already checking his watch. "Don't need help checking in. Been doing it myself for 40 years. "Dad, let me just walk you in. It's Thursday evening rush." Something in his voice made me pause, but I grabbed my small overnight bag and followed him inside. The terminal was busy, but not unusually so for a Thursday evening. "You know what?" Derek said as we approached the security checkpoint. "Why don't you put your bag in my trunk? You won't need it for the flight, and I can bring it to you tomorrow. It's got my phone charger, my medications, my wallet. I'll bring everything tomorrow, Dad. Promise. Plus, this way you won't have to deal with overhead bin space." I hesitated. The bag also contained the small photo album of Emma that I carried everywhere, along with my backup credit card and the cash I kept for emergencies. But Derek was already reaching for it, and I didn't want to start our trip with an argument. "All right," I said, handing it over. "But I need it first thing when I land." "Absolutely. I'll meet you at baggage claim with everything." We walked to security together, and Derek seemed increasingly agitated, checking his phone every few seconds. His hands were shaking slightly, something I'd never seen before. "Derek, you all right? You seem—" "I'm fine, Dad. Just stressed about this client presentation tomorrow." He stopped walking. "Listen, I need to step outside and make a quick call before you go through security. Important work thing that can't wait. You go ahead, and I'll watch from here until you're through." I should have trusted my instincts then. Should have asked why he needed to watch me go through security when he had urgent work calls to make. Should have wondered why a man who'd been distant for months suddenly cared about my travel comfort. Instead, I hugged him goodbye. "See you in Seattle, son." "Yeah," he said, not meeting my eyes. "See you there." I made it halfway through the security line before I realized I'd forgotten to ask for my boarding pass. Derek had been carrying both our phones and had our tickets on his mobile app. I stepped out of line and looked back toward the entrance. Derek was gone. I approached the security checkpoint with growing anxiety. Excuse me, I need to print my boarding pass, but my son has it on his phone and he just stepped outside. The TSA agent looked at me with practiced patience. Do you have your confirmation number, sir? It's on his phone. Do you have your ID? It's in my wallet, in his car. The agent's expression shifted from patience to concern. Sir, you need proper identification and a valid boarding pass to proceed through security. That's when reality hit me like a sledgehammer. Derek hadn't forgotten anything. He'd planned this. The early departure, the insistence on carrying my bag, the nervous energy, the sudden work call. It had all been orchestrated. I walked back through the terminal in a daze, checking every gate, every restaurant, every shop. Derek was nowhere to be found. I went outside to the pickup area and searched the entire loop twice. His white Honda was gone. For 30 minutes, I stood at the passenger pickup, convinced he'd return with some explanation, some story about a misunderstanding. Maybe his phone had died. Maybe he'd gotten confused about the terminal. Maybe there was a logical explanation for why my only child had driven me 2 hours from home and abandoned me. But as the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains and the October air grew cold, I had to accept the truth. Derek had used me. But for what? That's when the stranger approached me. He was probably 75, well-dressed in a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly income. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and he walked with a black cane topped with what looked like real silver. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a slight Boston accent. "I couldn't help but notice you've been sitting here for quite some time. Are you all right?" I looked up at him, this elegant old man with kind eyes, and felt something inside me crack. My son left me here. Took my wallet, my phone, everything. I don't even know why. The stranger studied my face for a long moment. Then he sat down on the bench beside me, his cane resting between his knees. "How old is your son?" he asked. 34. "And how long since you've had a real conversation with him?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean a conversation where you both said what you actually meant, where you talked about things that mattered instead of work schedules and weather." I thought about it. Really thought about it. Maybe 10 years, since before his mother got sick. The stranger nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. "My name is William Hartwell. I'm 76 years old, and I haven't spoken to my only son in 15 years, not since his mother's funeral." "I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be. It was my choice, and my pride that kept us apart." William adjusted his grip on his cane. "But unlike you, I have resources. Money, property, influence. And I've recently learned some information that's forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about my family." I waited for him to continue, but he seemed to be weighing something in his mind. "Frank, I'm assuming that's your name, given what I overheard. I've been coming to this airport every evening for the past week, looking for someone in a situation exactly like yours." "Looking for what? Someone genuine? Someone who understands loss, betrayal, disappointment. Someone who has nothing left to lose and might be willing to help an old man conduct an important test." William's directness was unsettling, but something in his manner suggested he wasn't crazy, just desperate. "What kind of test?" "I need someone to come to my home tonight and pretend to be my estranged son returning after many years away. Just for a few hours. Just long enough to observe how certain people in my household react to unexpected news." I stared at him. "You want me to impersonate your son? I want you to be the son who came back. There's a difference." "Why would you want to do that?" "Because I'm dying, Frank. Pancreatic cancer. 6 to 9 months if I'm lucky. And before I die, I need to know who among the people closest to me actually cares about me and who's just waiting for me to sign my will." The absurdity of it should have made me laugh. Instead, I found myself considering it. What else did I have to do? Where else did I have to go? And if Derek had really abandoned me, maybe I needed to find a way to understand why sons betray their fathers. "What's in it for me?" I asked. $5,000 in cash, a ride home to Colorado Springs tomorrow morning, and a chance to help an old man discover the truth about his family before it's too late. A black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, and a professionally dressed driver stepped out. "Mr. Hartwell, sir. Ready to go?" William stood slowly, extending his hand to me. "This is your choice, Frank Morrison. You can walk away right now, and I'll wish you well. Or you can get in this car and help me find out whether the people I love are planning to kill me for my money." I looked at that extended hand, weathered with age spots, but still strong. Then I thought about Derek's face when he dropped me off, how he couldn't even look me in the eye when he said goodbye. I shook William Hartwell's hand. What exactly would I have to do? William's black Mercedes felt like riding in a luxury hotel room compared to Derek's cramped Honda. The leather seats were heated, the ride was whisper quiet, and the driver, a professional chauffeur named Thomas, treated me with more respect in 5 minutes than my son had shown me in years. The estate is about 40 minutes from here, William said, as we merged onto the highway. I should prepare you for what you're walking into. I adjusted my seatbelt, still processing that 2 hours ago I'd been abandoned at an airport, and now I was in a car worth more than my annual income, heading to impersonate a stranger's dead son. Tell me about your real son, I said. William was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Finally he spoke. James was brilliant. Graduated from Harvard at 21, MBA from Wharton at 23. He was supposed to take over Hartwell Industries when I retired. What happened? He wanted to use his business skills to help struggling communities instead of maximizing shareholder profits. We fought about it constantly. Terrible things were said on both sides. What kind of terrible things? I called him naive and idealistic. He called me a soulless capitalist who valued profit over people. William's voice carried deep regret. The worst part is, we were both right. I watched the Colorado landscape roll past in the darkness. How did he die? Car accident in rural Kentucky. He was working with a non-profit to rebuild schools destroyed by flooding when a drunk driver hit his car on a mountain road. He was 31. William's knuckles were white where he gripped his cane. He died believing I was ashamed of him. Were you? No. I was terrified he was making a mistake, but I was never ashamed. I was proud that he had principles I'd somehow failed to instill consciously. William looked out the window. But pride is worthless when you're too stubborn to pick up a phone. I thought about Derek, about all the times I'd pushed him toward practical choices instead of supporting his dreams. When he was 16, he'd wanted to be a graphic designer. I told him design was unstable, that he needed a real career. When he was in college, he'd wanted to study abroad. I told him foreign travel was for rich kids, not working-class boys who needed to focus on building their futures. Maybe I'd been pushing him away his whole life. One practical lecture at a time. So who's at your house that you're worried about? I asked, pushing away thoughts of my own failures. My current wife, Patricia. She's 45, beautiful, and married me 2 years ago after a 6-month courtship that, in retrospect, was suspiciously perfect. William's tone was carefully neutral. My housekeeper, Mrs. Campbell, has been with me for 20 years. She knew James well. Anyone else? Patricia's brother, Michael, who's been staying with us for the past 2 months. He's supposedly looking for work, but he seems more interested in asking detailed questions about my estate planning and my medical treatments. And you think some of these people might have ulterior motives? Frank, when you're worth $40 million and dying of cancer, everyone around you suddenly becomes very concerned about your welfare and very interested in your legal documents. William smiled grimly. The question is whether their concern is genuine or financial. The Mercedes turned off the highway onto a winding mountain road. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of houses that belonged in architectural magazines, sprawling estates with circular driveways and landscaping that probably cost more than I'd made in a decade of construction work. What exactly am I supposed to do when we get there? I asked. Be yourself, but call me Dad. Act like someone who's been away for 15 years but has decided to come home. Let them draw their own conclusions about why you're back and what it might mean. What if they ask questions I can't answer? James left Colorado when he was 22 and rarely visited. You won't be expected to know details about his adult life here, because he didn't have one. William pulled a photo from his wallet. This is him at 29. I studied the picture. James Hartwell had been tall and lean with brown hair and intelligent eyes. We were roughly the same build, though he'd been younger and more polished than I'd ever been. William, they're going to know I'm not your son the minute they see me. Actually, they won't. Patricia never met him. They've only seen old photographs from his college years. Michael saw him exactly twice at family functions over a decade ago. Mrs. Campbell loved him dearly, but she's 79, and her eyesight isn't what it used to be. The Mercedes turned through ornate iron gates onto a circular driveway. Before us stood a house that looked like something from a movie. 3 stories of Colorado stone and timber with warm light glowing from dozens of windows. Jesus, I muttered. Language, son, William said with a slight smile. You're a Harvard graduate now. Thomas opened our door, and I stepped out into the crisp mountain air. The silence was profound after a lifetime of construction noise and city traffic, just wind in the pine trees and the distant sound of running water. Mr. Hartwell, Thomas said, shall I take the gentleman's bag to the guest room? Actually, Thomas, this is my son James. He'll be staying in his old room tonight. Thomas's eyes widened slightly, but he recovered quickly. Of course, sir. Welcome home, Mr. James. It's been many years. Thank you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Good to be back. As we walked toward the front door, William leaned close. Remember, you've been working with nonprofits in rural communities. You're tired, changed by your experiences, and not ready to discuss details about where you've been or why you've decided to come home now. The front door opened before we reached it. A woman appeared in the doorway, blonde, elegant, probably mid-40s, wearing what looked like a very expensive evening dress. This had to be Patricia. William, she called out, I thought I heard the car. How was your meeting in... She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me. Patricia, William said calmly, I'd like you to meet my son James. He's decided to come home. The color drained from Patricia's face. For a moment, she looked like she might be physically ill. Then she recovered, plastering on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. James? She said, her voice unnaturally high. Oh my goodness, this is such a surprise. William, you didn't tell me. I mean, this is wonderful. She approached me with her arms extended for a hug, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. This wasn't joy at meeting her stepson. This was panic at an unexpected complication to whatever plans she'd been making. Hello, Patricia, I said, accepting her embrace. Dad's told me so much about you. All good things, I hope. She laughed, but it sounded forced. Michael! Michael, come here! You have to meet William's son! A man appeared from the living room, mid-30s, soft around the middle, with the look of someone who'd never done physical labor. His reaction was even more dramatic than Patricia's. This is James? Michael asked, staring at me like I was a ghost. In the flesh, William said. After all these years, Michael's handshake was clammy and weak. Wow, this is unexpected. Really unexpected. I mean, William, you never mentioned that James was what? William's voice carried a warning. Was coming home, tonight, for a visit. Michael was sweating despite the cool evening air. Mrs. Campbell appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When she saw me, she stopped walking and studied my face intently. James? She whispered. Hello, Mrs. Campbell. She approached slowly, her examination of my features thorough and careful. I held my breath, certain she would expose me immediately. But instead, tears began forming in her eyes. You came home, she said softly, reaching up to touch my cheek with a weathered hand. After all these years, you finally came home to your father. Her emotion seemed completely genuine, which made me feel like a fraud for accepting it. I missed you too, I said, and meant it. William watched this entire exchange with the focused attention of a scientist observing an experiment. He was cataloging everyone's reactions, filing them away for future analysis. Well, Patricia said, clapping her hands together with forced enthusiasm. This calls for champagne. Michael, would you open that bottle of Dom Perignon we've been saving? Actually, William said, I think James might prefer something simpler after his long journey. Just a beer would be great, I said. If you have one. Of course. Patricia's smile was becoming more strained by the minute. Mrs. Campbell, would you mind? I'll get it myself, Mrs. Campbell said, still looking at me with wonder. Just like when you were young, you always preferred simple things to fancy ones. As she headed to the kitchen, Patricia and Michael exchanged a look that lasted exactly 1 second too long. It was the kind of look that passes between conspirators when their carefully laid plans suddenly become complicated. William saw it too. His slight nod told me I was performing exactly as he'd hoped. Patricia, he said casually, didn't you mention you had important calls to make this evening? Calls? Oh yes, very important calls that can't wait. She was backing toward the stairs. I should probably take care of those right away. Welcome home, James. I'm sure we'll have lots of time to catch up tomorrow. She practically fled upstairs. Michael lingered for a moment, clearly wanting to say something but not sure what. I should probably call my girlfriend, he finally said. Let her know I might be staying a few more days to spend time with family. Of course, William said. Take your time. Michael disappeared into the living room, already pulling out his phone. Mrs. Campbell returned with my beer and sat down beside William on the sofa. Tell me about where you've been, she said. Your father mentioned you were working with schools and children. I thought about James Hartwell, trying to rebuild communities in rural Kentucky, working with kids who needed someone to believe in their futures. It's been difficult work, I said, but rewarding. There are so many communities that have been forgotten. So many kids who just need someone to invest in their education. Mrs. Campbell nodded approvingly. Your heart was always bigger than your business sense. I used to tell your father that. William reached over and squeezed her hand. You were right. As usual. From upstairs, I could hear Patricia's voice through the thin walls. She was on the phone, but her tone was urgent, almost frantic. I couldn't make out words, but the melody of panic was unmistakable. In the living room, Michael was also on his phone. His voice was lower, more controlled, but equally intense. They're both making calls, I observed quietly. Yes, William said. The question is, who are they calling, and what are they saying? Mrs. Campbell looked confused. Why would Patricia need to call anyone? James coming home is wonderful news. William and I exchanged a look. Mrs. Campbell's confusion was genuine. Unlike Patricia and Michael, she had no hidden agenda, no reason to be disturbed by my arrival. Mrs. Campbell, William said gently, would you mind preparing the blue guest room as well? James might have visitors tomorrow. Visitors? Some old friends who knew him before he left. People who might want to welcome him home. I realized what William was doing. He was setting the stage for phase 2 of whatever test he was conducting. My arrival had been the catalyst. Now he was preparing to see who else might come out of the woodwork once word spread that James Hartwell had returned. Mrs. Campbell disappeared to prepare the room, humming happily to herself. For her, my presence was pure joy. For Patricia and Michael, it was clearly a disaster. William, I said quietly, what exactly do you think those two are planning? I've had suspicions for months, but I needed confirmation. He set down his glass and looked at me directly. Frank, are you prepared for this situation to become more dangerous than you expected? Upstairs, Patricia's voice rose to an unmistakable whine. In the living room, Michael cursed under his breath, clearly audible from where we sat. Define dangerous, I said. I think my wife and her brother have been slowly poisoning me with medication that's supposed to help my condition. And your arrival tonight just destroyed their timeline. At 11 p.m., I lay in James Hartwell's childhood bedroom, staring at ceiling molding that probably cost more than my annual property taxes, and wondering how I'd gone from abandoned construction worker to potentially sabotaging a murder plot in 6 hours. The room was a museum of privileged childhood, Harvard pennants, rowing trophies, and first-edition books that belonged in a library. I couldn't sleep, partly because the luxury mattress felt like floating on air when I was used to my worn-out futon, but mostly because the house had become a symphony of whispered conversations and creaking floorboards. Patricia and Michael were definitely planning something, and William's casual mention of potential poisoning kept replaying in my mind. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door, then hushed voices just beyond the wooden panels. I got up quietly and pressed my ear to the door. Can't be James, Michael was saying. I met James at the engagement party. This guy looks nothing like him. But Mrs. Campbell recognized him immediately. Patricia's voice was strained. She seemed so certain. Mrs. Campbell is almost 80 and has been wearing the same glasses for 10 years. She sees what she wants to see. There was a pause. Then Patricia again. What if William knows? What if this is some kind of test? Then we're in serious trouble. Michael's voice was grim. If he's testing us, it means he suspects something about the medication adjustments. What do? We stick to our schedule. Dr. Reynolds comes tomorrow afternoon for the routine checkup. If this guy really is James, then William might change his will again to include his son. If he's not James, Then William's playing games, and we need to be very careful. I heard them moving away from my door, but their conversation continued as they walked toward the stairs. Called David tonight, Michael was saying. He'll be here first thing in the morning. If this guy is some kind of imposter, David will expose him within 5 minutes. And if he is James, then we accelerate our timeline. The dosage increase can't wait until next week. I felt my blood chill. Dosage increase. In the context of suspected poisoning, that sounded like they were planning to kill William much sooner than originally planned. I waited until their voices faded completely, then crept to the window. Below, I could see Patricia and Michael standing by the swimming pool, still talking intensely under the outdoor lighting. Patricia was gesturing wildly, clearly agitated. Michael remained calmer, his hands in his pockets, but even from this distance I could see the tension in his posture. A soft knock on my door made me freeze. "James?" Mrs. Campbell's voice was barely above a whisper. I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway in a bathrobe, holding a tray with cookies and a glass of warm milk. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. "You used to have trouble sleeping when you were worried about something." "Thank you, Mrs. Campbell. That's very thoughtful." She set the tray on the bedside table, then sat in the chair near the window. "James, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you really here just to visit? Or is something wrong? You seem different. Older, yes, but also worried. Like you're carrying something heavy." I sat on the edge of the bed, moved by her genuine concern. This woman had loved the real James Hartwell, and her care for him was extending to me. An imposter who didn't deserve it. "I'm worried about Dad's health," I said carefully, "and about some of the people around him." Mrs. Campbell nodded slowly. "Patricia? You mean Patricia and her brother? What do you think of them?" "I think Patricia married a lonely widower for reasons that have nothing to do with love," Mrs. Campbell said bluntly. "And I think Michael is a man who sees opportunity in other people's misfortune. Has anything strange been happening lately? With Dad's medications or his symptoms?" Mrs. Campbell was quiet for a long moment, studying my face in the lamplight. Then she reached into her bathrobe pocket and pulled out a small pill bottle. "I found this hidden behind the flour canister yesterday," she said, handing it to me. "It's not one of your father's regular medications. I called his primary physician's office this morning. Dr. Martinez has never prescribed this." I looked at the label. The medication name meant nothing to me, but it was prescribed to William Hartwell by a Dr. Reynolds, the same doctor Michael had mentioned would be coming tomorrow. "What does this medication do?" I looked it up online. In normal doses, it treats irregular heartbeat. In higher doses, especially combined with his cancer medications, it can cause heart failure. I felt my stomach drop. "Mrs. Campbell, has Dad been having any unusual symptoms? Dizziness? Extreme fatigue? Confusion?" "Yes, for the past 6 weeks, ever since Patricia started helping with his daily medications. Your father's been very tired, sometimes disoriented. Dr. Martinez says it's normal cancer progression, but," she shook her head, clearly troubled, "but you don't think it's just the cancer? James, I've been taking care of sick people for 20 years before your father hired me. I know the difference between illness fatigue and something else." I looked at the pill bottle again, turning it over in my hands. "Have you seen anyone giving Dad medications that aren't in his regular pill organizer? Patricia has been very insistent about personally administering his evening medications. She says she wants to make sure he doesn't accidentally double dose." Mrs. Campbell's voice was heavy with implication. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over both of us. "Mrs. Campbell, I need to tell you something, and I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" She nodded without hesitation. "I'm going to tell you something that will sound impossible, but I need your help to protect my father." I took a deep breath. "I'm not really James." Her eyes widened, but she didn't look shocked. More like someone whose suspicions had just been confirmed. "I suspected," she said quietly. "James was left-handed. You're right-handed. James had a small scar on his chin from falling off his bicycle when he was 12. You don't have that scar." I stared at her. "Then why did you—" "Because whoever you are, you're here to help William. I can see it in your eyes, and because," her voice softened, "because I think the real James would want someone to protect his father, even if he couldn't do it himself." This remarkable woman had seen through my deception immediately, but had chosen to support William's plan anyway. My real name is Frank Morrison. William hired me to pretend to be James so he could observe how people would react to his son's return. He suspects Patricia and Michael are trying to poison him. Mrs. Campbell nodded grimly. I've suspected the same thing for weeks, but William is proud. He wouldn't want to believe his wife could betray him so completely. What do? We protect him, and we gather evidence that will stand up in court. Mrs. Campbell stood up with new determination. I've been documenting his symptoms, taking photos of his medications, keeping track of when he feels worse. If someone is poisoning him, we need proof that police will accept. Mrs. Campbell, you could be in serious danger if they figure out what you know. Mr. Morrison, I helped raise that boy from the time he was 12 until he left for college. I bandaged his scraped knees, helped him with his homework, listened to his dreams about helping forgotten communities. Her voice was fierce. I couldn't save James from that drunk driver, but I will not let anyone hurt his father while I'm still breathing. From somewhere downstairs came the sound of a door closing. Mrs. Campbell and I both froze. They're coming back inside, she whispered. Go back to your room. Act normal. We'll talk more tomorrow. She gathered up the tray and headed for the door, then turned back. Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming here, for caring enough about a stranger to help him. After she left, I lay back on the bed with my mind racing. I thought I was just helping a lonely old man conduct a social experiment. Instead, I was in the middle of what appeared to be attempted murder. I pulled out the cheap burner phone I'd bought during my retirement, my one concession to modern technology, and found Derek's number. He answered on the first ring. Dad? Jesus, I've been worried sick. Where are you? Derek, I need you to listen carefully. I'm at the home of a man named William Hartwell in the Colorado mountains. If you don't hear from me by tomorrow evening, call the police and give them this address. Dad, what's going on? You're scaring me. I think I've stumbled into something dangerous. These people might be trying to kill this man for his money. Dad, you need to leave. Right now. I can't. There's an old woman here who's trying to protect him, and she can't do it alone. I thought about Mrs. Campbell's fierce loyalty, about William's desperate need for truth before he died. Derek, sometimes you have to do the right thing, even when it's scary. Dad, Derek, I love you. Whatever you think about how I raised you, whatever mistakes we both made, I love you. There was a long pause. I love you too. Dad, please be careful. I hung up and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Tomorrow would bring David, whoever he was, along with Dr. Reynolds and his suspicious medication. The chess game was accelerating, and I was still learning the rules while other people planned the endgame. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something important, something worth the risk. I woke up at dawn to find a note slipped under my door. Meet me in the kitchen at 6 a.m. We have work to do. Campbell. Mrs. Campbell was waiting with coffee and a folder thick with documents when I arrived downstairs. The early morning light filtering through the windows made the kitchen feel like a war room. I couldn't sleep, she said, gesturing to the papers spread across the table. So I gathered everything I've been collecting for the past 2 months. The documents were meticulously organized. Photos of William's daily medications, copies of pharmacy receipts, a detailed journal tracking his symptoms, and printouts of her research into drug interactions. Mrs. Campbell, this is incredible. It's also not enough. We have evidence that something suspicious is happening, but we need proof of intent to murder. She poured herself coffee with steady hands. That's why today is so important. Today? Dr. Reynolds comes at 2 p.m. for William's routine checkup. Patricia specifically requested this appointment and insisted on being present for all medical discussions. Mrs. Campbell's tone made it clear what she thought of this sudden medical involvement. I think they're planning to get a prescription for something that will finish the job. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard, about Michael mentioning an accelerated timeline and dosage increases. What do we need to do? William has a hidden camera system throughout the house, security measures he installed after a break-in 3 years ago. Only he and I know about it. Mrs. Campbell pulled out a small device. If we can record Patricia and Michael discussing their plans or catch them tampering with medications, we'll have evidence the police can use. How do we get them to incriminate themselves on camera? We don't. We let your presence do the work for us. Mrs. Campbell smiled with grim satisfaction. Your arrival has them panicked and making mistakes. Today, with David coming to expose you and Dr. Reynolds coming to approve their murder weapon, they're going to have to coordinate their stories. That coordination will happen on camera. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted our planning. Mrs. Campbell quickly gathered the documents while I pretended to be reading a newspaper. Patricia appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing an expensive robe and the kind of perfect makeup that suggested she'd been awake for hours. "Oh," she said, her surprise clearly performed. "James, you're up early. Construction work teaches you to rise with the sun," I said. "Hope I didn't wake anyone." "Not at all. I'm always up early myself." Patricia moved to the coffee machine with studied casualness. "Mrs. Campbell, William seems to be sleeping very deeply this morning. Is that normal for his medication routine?" Mrs. Campbell and I exchanged a quick glance. This sounded like Patricia fishing for information about whether she'd given William too strong a dose of something. "Mr. Hartwell has been sleeping more heavily lately," Mrs. Campbell said carefully. "The doctor says it's part of the disease progression." Of course. Poor William." Patricia's concern sounded as authentic as a $3 bill. "James, I was wondering, how long are you planning to stay? I'd love to plan some family activities. I haven't decided yet. Depends on how Dad's feeling and whether we can spend some quality time together." Patricia's smile flickered. Any mention of me spending time with William clearly worried her. "Well, we'll have to see how today goes. William has a doctor's appointment this afternoon, and then a friend of the family is stopping by. Someone who knew you years ago. It should be quite a reunion." The implied threat was subtle but unmistakable. The friend had to be David, coming to expose me as an imposter. Michael appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd slept poorly. "Morning," he mumbled, heading straight for the coffee. "Michael, James was just telling us about his construction work," Patricia said brightly. "Isn't that interesting?" Michael studied me with suspicious eyes. "Construction? I thought you went into international development work." I'd walked into a trap. The real James had worked with non-profits, not construction. But I recovered quickly. "Community development includes a lot of hands-on building," I said. "Schools, community centers, infrastructure projects. Hard to help rural communities without understanding construction." "Right," Michael said, but he didn't look convinced. "Which countries did you work in?" "Mostly here in the United States. Rural Kentucky, West Virginia, parts of Tennessee, where flooding and economic decline left communities without proper educational facilities." This was actually close to the truth about James's work, based on what William had told me. "Interesting," Patricia said. "William always said you were working abroad." Dad was never very clear on the details of my work. We didn't communicate much during those years. The painful truth in that statement seemed to satisfy both Patricia and Michael. They exchanged a look that suggested they were reassessing their strategy. "Well," Patricia said, "I should go check on William. Make sure he's all right after sleeping so deeply." After she left, Michael lingered in the kitchen, clearly wanting to probe further but not sure how to do it without arousing suspicion. "James, can I ask you something?" he finally said. "Sure. Why did you come back now? After all these years of avoiding your father, why show up when he's—" Michael gestured vaguely. "When he's dying," I finished. "Because I realized I was about to lose the only chance I'd ever have to make things right between us." The simple honesty of that statement seemed to catch Michael off guard. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That's actually really mature of you. Took me long enough to figure it out." Michael left the kitchen looking thoughtful, and Mrs. Campbell immediately moved closer to me. "Well done," she whispered. "But be careful. They're both looking for inconsistencies in your story." At 9 a.m., a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, we watched a man in an expensive suit get out, tall, mid-40s, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested he was used to being in charge. "That must be David," I said. Mrs. Campbell activated the hidden recording system with a small remote. "Whatever happens next, we'll have it on camera." David knocked on the front door, and Patricia answered with enthusiastic greetings that carried clearly to our position in the kitchen. Within minutes, the three of them, Patricia, Michael, and David, had gathered in the living room for what sounded like an urgent strategy session. "Can you hear what they're saying?" I whispered. Mrs. Campbell shook her head. But there are cameras in the living room. Everything's being recorded. 20 minutes later, Patricia came to find me in the kitchen. James, there's someone here who'd love to see you, an old family friend who knew you in college. I followed her to the living room, where David was standing by the fireplace with the confident smile of a man who thought he held all the cards. James Hartwell, he said, extending his hand. It's been a long time. I'm sorry, I said, not taking his hand. Do we know each other? David Thompson. We met at a few family functions years ago. He studied my face intently. You look different than I remember. 15 years of hard work will change a man. Of course. Tell me, how's your photography hobby coming along? You were always so passionate about capturing images of nature. I felt my heart skip. This was clearly a test, some detail about James that only someone who really knew him would remember. I haven't had much time for photography lately, I said. Been too focused on more practical concerns. David's smile sharpened. That's surprising. You used to say that photography was the only way you could truly capture the beauty of God's creation. Another test. And this one felt like a landmine. People change, David. Priorities shift when you're working with communities that need schools more than they need art. David looked disappointed that I hadn't fallen into his trap. Well, I suppose practical concerns do take precedence. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with David probing about details of James's past, while I deflected with general responses about time-changing people and perspectives. Finally, he seemed to give up. Well, James, it's been wonderful catching up. I should probably be going. After David left, Patricia and Michael seemed frustrated, but not defeated. I had the distinct feeling that their backup plan was already in motion. At 2 p.m. sharp, Dr. Reynolds arrived for William's appointment. He was a thin, nervous man who seemed uncomfortable with the attention Patricia was paying to every detail of William's treatment. I positioned myself outside William's study where I could hear the medical consultation through the partially open door. Mr. Hartwell, Dr. Reynolds was saying, your blood work shows some concerning irregularities. I think we need to adjust your cardiac medication to prevent any complications. What kind of complications? William asked. With your cancer progression, we need to be very careful about heart strain. This new prescription should help regulate your heartbeat and prevent any sudden cardiac episodes. Patricia's voice chimed in. Doctor, how quickly should we expect to see improvement? The medication works quite rapidly. You should see effects within 24 to 48 hours. My blood ran cold. In the context of everything we suspected, that sounded less like medical treatment and more like a murder timeline. After Dr. Reynolds left, I found Mrs. Campbell in the kitchen. She was pale but determined. Did you hear? I asked. Every word, and it's all recorded. She showed me her phone, which had been live streaming the hidden camera feed to a secure cloud server. Even if something happens to us, this evidence will survive. Mrs. Campbell, I think we need to call the police, tonight. Agreed. But first, we need to make sure William is safe until help arrives. As if summoned by our conversation, William appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked frailer than he had yesterday, but his eyes were alert and focused. Frank, Mrs. Campbell, I think it's time we had a very serious conversation about what's been happening in my house. William sat at the kitchen table with the air of a man who had been expecting this moment for weeks. He looked at Mrs. Campbell's folder of evidence, then at me, and smiled with grim satisfaction. I've known about the poisoning for 6 weeks, he said simply. Mrs. Campbell and I stared at him in shock. You've known, Mrs. Campbell managed. I've been having my blood tested privately every week at a lab in Denver. When my symptoms didn't match what my oncologist expected, I had them check for foreign substances. William pulled out his own folder of documents. Patricia and Michael have been slowly increasing my digoxin levels for 2 months. I felt completely disoriented. Then why didn't you go to the police? Because I needed to understand the full scope of their plan. Patricia married me after a whirlwind courtship that in retrospect was clearly calculated. Michael appeared claiming to need temporary help, but has spent 2 months asking detailed questions about my will and my business assets. William opened his folder to reveal bank statements, private investigator reports, and what looked like medical records. I hired a private detective to research Patricia's background. She's been married twice before, both times to elderly widowers who died within 18 months of their marriages, both of natural causes. Mrs. Campbell said quietly. Both of cardiac episodes that occurred shortly after their wills were changed to benefit Patricia substantially. William's voice was hard with anger. She's been practicing this con for years, and she's gotten very good at it. I thought about Dr. Reynolds' visit, about the new cardiac medication that would show rapid effects. William, the doctor today, Dr. Reynolds isn't Patricia's first choice. He's her fourth choice. She's been shopping for a physician who would prescribe what she needs without asking inconvenient questions. William tapped the investigator's report. He's had his medical license suspended twice for inappropriate prescribing practices. The scope of their planning was staggering. This wasn't an opportunistic crime. It was a sophisticated operation that had been refined over multiple victims. So why the charade with me pretending to be James? I asked. Because I needed to see how they'd react to unexpected complications. I needed to know if they'd abandon their plan when it became risky, or if they'd accelerate it. William's smile was cold. Your arrival has forced them to show their true priorities. Mrs. Campbell leaned forward. What do you mean? If Patricia truly cared about me, she'd be happy that my estranged son had returned. She'd want us to reconcile before I die. William pulled out his phone and showed us a text message. Instead, she's been messaging someone named David all night about eliminating complications and maintaining the schedule. I felt sick. Eliminating complications. That could mean they've decided to kill both of us, William finished. You, because you're an unexpected witness. Me, because they can't afford to wait any longer. Mrs. Campbell's face had gone pale. William, we need to call the police immediately. I called them an hour ago, William said calmly. Detective Morrison from the Colorado Springs Police Department is driving up here now with a warrant for Patricia and Michael's arrest. I blinked. Detective Morrison? Your son Derek is a detective? William asked. No, Derek works in tech. He's never been in law enforcement. A horrible realization was dawning. William, Derek isn't a detective. Derek's the one who abandoned me at the airport. William's confident expression faltered. That's impossible. Derek Morrison called me this morning, identified himself as a Colorado Springs detective, said you'd contacted him about a dangerous situation. My hand started shaking. William, someone is playing all of us. Derek doesn't know where I am. Derek took my phone and left me stranded. Mrs. Campbell grabbed my arm. Then who called pretending to be your son? Before I could answer, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, casting eerie shadows throughout the kitchen. In the sudden darkness, we heard the front door open and close. William, Patricia's voice called out from the entryway. The power seems to have gone out. Where are you? Stay quiet, William whispered. There's a safe room behind the pantry. Mrs. Campbell knows how to open it. Mrs. Campbell was already moving toward the back wall of the kitchen, her hands feeling along what looked like a standard pantry door. She pressed something, and a section of the wall swung inward. James? William? Patricia's voice was closer now, moving through the house. Where is everyone? We slipped into the safe room just as footsteps entered the kitchen. Through a hidden camera monitor, we could see Patricia and Michael searching the kitchen with flashlights. But they weren't alone. David was with them, and he was carrying a gun. They're not here, Michael said, his voice tight with stress. Check upstairs, Patricia ordered. They couldn't have left without us seeing the car. What about the safe room? David asked. My blood ran cold. David knew about William's security measures. What safe room? Patricia asked. Old man like Hartwell, living alone with millions in assets. He's got a safe room somewhere in this house. David was methodically checking the walls with his flashlight. Question is where? We watched in horror as David approached the exact section of wall we'd entered through. Found it, he said. William was already reaching for something mounted on the safe room wall, a shotgun that looked well-maintained and ready for use. William, no, Mrs. Campbell whispered. You're too weak from the medication. You can barely stand. She was right. The weeks of poisoning had left William frail and unsteady, but he was the only one among us with any weapon experience. Frank, William said quietly, have you ever used a firearm? 40 years of construction work in some rough neighborhoods. Yeah, I can handle a gun. William handed me the shotgun. Safety's off. It's loaded with buckshot. Effective range is about 20 feet. On the monitor, We could see David examining the wall mechanism, trying to figure out how to open it. "He's going to find the switch," Mrs. Campbell whispered. "There's another exit," William said, pointing to a second door at the back of the safe room. "It leads to the garage through a tunnel. We can get to the cars." "What about calling for real help?" I asked. "Phone lines are cut. Cell tower is probably jammed. David's done this before." We were moving toward the back exit when the safe room's main entrance began to swing open. David had found the mechanism. "William Hartwell." David's voice was calm, professional. "Come out and we can discuss this reasonably. No one needs to get hurt unnecessarily." "Unnecessarily," Mrs. Campbell muttered. What a generous offer. We reached the tunnel exit, but when William tried to open it, nothing happened. The electronic lock wasn't responding. Emergency power doesn't extend to the tunnel system, William realized. We're trapped. David's flashlight beam was now probing the interior of the safe room. In seconds, he'd see us. I made a decision that probably saved our lives. I stepped out of the shadows with the shotgun raised. "David, stop right there." He froze, his own weapon half raised. "Frank Morrison," he said with what sounded like genuine admiration. "You've been more resourceful than anyone expected." Expected by who? By the people who hired me to handle this situation cleanly and quietly. David's gun was still pointed downward, but I could see him calculating angles and distances. "This was supposed to be a simple inheritance acceleration. You've turned it into something much more complicated." Inheritance acceleration? Patricia's third husband, Michael's second Mark. They're good at what they do, but sometimes they need professional help to handle unexpected problems. I kept the shotgun trained on David while trying to process what he was telling me. "You're professional killers. I'm a problem solver. Patricia and Michael are skilled at winning the trust of elderly men with assets. Sometimes complications arise that require additional expertise. Complications like estranged sons returning home. Complications like fake estranged sons who might have witnessed too much." David smiled coldly. "Tell me, Frank, who hired you to impersonate James Hartwell?" The question caught me off guard. "William hired me." "Did he? Or did someone else arrange for you to be abandoned at exactly the right place and time for William to find you?" My hand started trembling on the shotgun. "What are you talking about?" "Derek Morrison received $10,000 to abandon you at Denver International Airport last Thursday evening. But Derek Morrison has never met me, never spoke to anyone named David Henley, and doesn't know anything about inheritance fraud." The room was spinning around me. "That's impossible. Someone else was using Derek's name and manipulating him into position. Someone who needed William Hartwell to find a convincing replacement for his dead son." David's voice was soft, hypnotic. Someone who knew that William would trust a fellow victim of family betrayal. I thought about Derek's strange behavior, his nervous energy, his refusal to meet my eyes when he dropped me off. "Who?" I whispered. David's smile widened. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" From behind me, I heard the slow clap of someone applauding. I turned, keeping the shotgun trained on David, to see William standing in the tunnel doorway. But William's expression had changed completely. The frail, desperate old man was gone, replaced by someone calculating and cold. "Excellent work, David," William said, though the timeline got a bit more complicated than we planned. Mrs. Campbell stepped away from William with horror on her face. "What is going on?" "What's going on, my dear Mrs. Campbell, is that you've been protecting a man who doesn't need protection." William's voice was stronger now, more confident. "And Frank has been helping a victim who was never actually in danger." The shotgun felt suddenly heavy in my hands as the truth crashed over me. "You're not dying," I said. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 months to live. It's amazing how convincing an oncology report can look when it's professionally forged." William stepped fully into the safe room. "David, you can lower your weapon. Frank won't shoot anyone. He's fundamentally too decent for violence." David holstered his gun with casual confidence. "But the poisoning," Mrs. Campbell started, "was carefully controlled doses of medication that would make me appear ill without actually endangering my life. I needed to look sick enough to make Patricia's murder plot seem plausible." I stared at this man who had completely fooled me. "Why?" "Because, Frank, my son James is very much alive, and he's been using Patricia and Michael to help him access my money while I'm still breathing to enjoy it. The safe room felt like it was shrinking around me as William's revelation shattered everything I thought I understood about the past 2 days. Mrs. Campbell looked as shocked as I felt, her face pale in the emergency lighting. "James is alive," Mrs. Campbell whispered. "Very much so. In fact, he should be arriving any minute now." William checked his watch with the casual air of someone keeping an appointment. "You see, Mrs. Campbell, the car accident in Kentucky 15 years ago did happen, but James survived it. He just chose to let the world, including me, believe he had died." I kept the shotgun raised, though my hands were shaking with confusion and rage. Why would he do that? Because James discovered something very interesting about inheritance law while he was getting his MBA, William said. If the heir to a fortune disappears or is presumed dead, and then resurfaces years later, they can claim not only their original inheritance but also any increase in the estate's value during their absence. David moved closer, no longer seeing me as a threat. Plus, if the heir can prove that someone else attempted to murder the estate holder during his absence, all assets obtained through that murder become null and void. The pieces were falling into place in my mind, creating a picture so twisted I could barely comprehend it. "Patricia and Michael," I said slowly, "they're not trying to murder you for your money. They're trying to murder me because James hired them to," William confirmed. "And when they succeed, James will appear miraculously alive, claim that his father was murdered by gold diggers while he was away, and inherit everything as the grieving, victimized son." Mrs. Campbell sank into a chair, the weight of the betrayal crushing. "All these years I mourned that boy. I believed he was dead. James needed everyone to believe it, especially you. Your grief was essential to the performance." William's voice carried no sympathy. A housekeeper who genuinely believed the son was dead would never suspect the son of orchestrating the father's murder. I thought about the past 2 days, about how perfectly everything had fallen into place. My abandonment at the airport, William's offer, my convincing performance as James. But why involve me? Why bring in a stranger? "Because the plan required a witness," David explained. "Someone who would see Patricia and Michael plotting William's murder. Someone who would testify about their guilt when James returned to claim his inheritance. You needed a patsy," I realized. "We needed a good man who would do the right thing when he witnessed a crime," William corrected. "Frank, everything you've done has been admirable. You protected someone you thought needed protection. You gathered evidence of what you believed was attempted murder. You risked your own safety to help strangers. The only problem," David added, "is that you've been protecting the wrong person from the wrong crime." Footsteps echoed through the house above us. Car doors slammed outside. "Right on schedule," William said. On the monitor, we could see Patricia and Michael moving through the house. But now they were accompanied by 2 other figures. One was a tall, lean man in his 40s with the same eyes as William. The other was someone who made my blood freeze. Derek. My son was walking through William Hartwell's house as if he belonged there. "No," I breathed. "I'm afraid so," William said gently. "Derek has been part of this operation from the beginning." "That's impossible." "Derek was manipulated, tricked into abandoning me." "Frank," William's voice was patient, almost kind. "Derek has received $47,000 over the past 6 months for his role in this operation. The story about needing money for Emma's surgery was fiction designed to make his betrayal seem sympathetic rather than calculated." I stared at the monitor, watching my son, my own flesh and blood, coordinating with people planning my death. But Emma's surgery. Emma is perfectly healthy. The deviated septum story was cover for Derek's frequent trips to meet with our planning committee. David pulled out a tablet and showed me bank records. "Derek's been getting paid monthly installments for over half a year." On the screen, Derek was pointing toward the kitchen, directing the others toward our location. He knew exactly where to look. Mrs. Campbell stood up with fury blazing in her eyes. "You used that boy's love for his father to manipulate him into betraying that same father. What kind of monster does that? The kind who learns that family loyalty is a weakness that can be exploited." The voice came from behind us. James Hartwell stepped into the safe room through the tunnel entrance. Apparently the lock had been remotely controlled, not broken. He looked exactly like the photos William had shown me, but 15 years older, and with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. "Hello, Father," James said. "It's been a long time." Not nearly long enough, William replied. Mrs. Campbell lunged toward James with her hands outstretched, whether to embrace him or attack him. I couldn't tell. David caught her arm and held her back. Easy, Mrs. Campbell. I know this is confusing. Confusing? She turned on William with fury. You let me mourn this boy for 15 years. You let me put flowers on an empty grave. You let me cry myself to sleep thinking about his wasted life. I mourned him too, William said quietly. The boy I raised died in that car accident, even if his body survived. This man who came back is someone I don't recognize. James laughed. Drama was never your strong suit. Father, I didn't die. I evolved. Derek appeared on the monitor, now standing in the kitchen with Patricia and Michael. He was pointing directly at our location. He knows about the safe room, I said numbly. Of course he does. Derek has had complete blueprints of this house for months. James pulled out his own tablet, showing architectural drawings. We needed to know every possible escape route, every security measure, every way you might try to avoid your fate. I raised the shotgun toward James. My fate? Frank, you've served your purpose admirably. You've witnessed Patricia and Michael's murder plot. You've gathered evidence of their guilt, and you've provided testimony that will exonerate me when I return from the dead to claim my inheritance. James's tone was conversational, as if he was explaining a business transaction. Unfortunately, victims of murder conspiracies rarely survive to testify. But the evidence, the recordings, will show Patricia and Michael killing both you and my father in a botched robbery that went wrong. James smiled. Very tragic, very believable, and very profitable for me. Through the monitor, we could see Derek leading Patricia and Michael toward the safe room. They were carrying what looked like professional equipment, cameras, audio recording gear. They're going to film it, Mrs. Campbell realized with horror. Insurance, David explained. James needs video evidence of the murder for his court case. Proves that Patricia and Michael killed William while he was away. Validates his claim to the inheritance. I thought about Derek, my son, setting up cameras to record my death. Why? I asked, though I wasn't sure if I was asking William, James, or Derek. Money, Frank. $40 million makes people do remarkable things. James checked his watch again. Though in Derek's case, I think it was less about greed and more about revenge. Revenge. Derek has some very interesting stories about his childhood. About a father who never supported his dreams, who pushed him toward practical choices, who made him feel like his creative ambitions were worthless. James's smile was predatory. Amazing how much anger a son can carry for decades. The tunnel entrance opened, and Derek stepped into the safe room. He looked older than when I'd seen him 2 days ago, his face harder. Hello, Dad, he said. I stared at my son, my betrayer, my judge, my executioner, and felt something break inside my chest that had nothing to do with physical injury. Derek, why? Because you never believed in me. Because every conversation we had was about being practical, being realistic, being responsible. Derek's voice carried years of accumulated pain. Because when Mom got sick, you threw yourself into work instead of dealing with your family. I was trying to provide for us. You were avoiding us, and after she died, you just gave up. On everything. On me, on Emma, on having any kind of life worth living. I thought about those terrible years after Sarah's death, about how I'd retreated into work and routine because facing the world without her was unbearable. Derek, I was grieving. We were all grieving. But you made me grieve alone. Derek's voice cracked. And then, when you retired, when you had nothing but time, you still couldn't be bothered to be part of my life or Emma's life. Mrs. Campbell was staring at Derek with a mixture of pity and disgust. So you decided to have him killed? I decided to let him experience what it feels like to be abandoned by someone you trust. Derek pulled out his phone and showed me a text conversation. The plan was supposed to be simple. Leave him at the airport. Let him stew in his abandonment for a few hours, then come back and rescue him. I read the messages. Derek's contact was listed as J. Hartwell, and the conversation went back months. But then James offered you real money to make the abandonment permanent, I said. James offered me a chance to make Dad understand what real betrayal feels like. Derek's eyes were bright with unshed tears. $47,000 was just a bonus. James stepped forward. Touching as this family reunion is, we need to wrap this up. Patricia and Michael are getting impatient, and we have a schedule to maintain. Through the monitor, we could see Patricia setting up a camera in the kitchen while Michael arranged what looked like evidence of a burglary. "One question," Mrs. Campbell said to James. "If you're so smart, so clever, why didn't you just ask your father for money? Why this elaborate scheme?" "Because my father would have given me money," James replied. "A monthly allowance, a salary for working in his business, a trust fund with restrictions and conditions. He would have controlled my access to wealth for the rest of his life. So I wanted all of it. Every penny. No restrictions, no conditions, no having to ask permission or explain my spending." James's mask of civility was slipping. "I wanted my father dead and gone so I could live without his judgment, his disappointment, his constant attempts to make me into someone I never wanted to be." William was staring at his son with profound sadness. "James, I would have done anything for you, anything you asked, except die quietly and leave me alone with your money." The pure selfishness in that statement hung in the air like poison. Derek moved toward the safe room exit. "It's time, Dad. I looked at my son, my betrayer, and made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself." I handed him the shotgun. "If you're going to do this," I said, "you're going to have to do it yourself." Derek stared at the shotgun in his hands like it might explode. His face went pale. And for the first time since entering the safe room, he looked like the scared, confused son I remembered rather than the calculating stranger who'd been planning my death. "Dad, what are you doing?" "I'm calling your bluff, Derek. If you really want me dead, if you really think I'm such a terrible father that I deserve to be murdered for money, then pull that trigger yourself." James stepped forward with irritation. "This isn't how the plan works, Frank. Derek doesn't need to actually shoot you. That's what Patricia and Michael are for." "Then Derek's not really getting his revenge, is he?" I kept my eyes locked on my son's face. "He's just letting other people do his dirty work while he counts his money." "Shut up," Derek whispered, but his hands were shaking on the gun. $37,000, Derek. That's what your father's life is worth to you. Broken down hourly over 34 years of raising you, that comes out to about 32 cents per year. I took a step closer to him. "I spent more than that on your school lunch money every week. You don't understand. I understand that your mother would be ashamed of you." Derek's face crumpled. "Don't." Sarah Morrison raised a son who was creative, thoughtful, generous. She would be heartbroken to know that her boy grew up to be someone who sells his father's life for pocket change. Mrs. Campbell was watching this confrontation with growing hope. William looked fascinated by the psychological dynamics. James looked increasingly annoyed. "Frank, this emotional manipulation isn't going to work," James said coldly. "Derek has been committed to this plan for months. A few guilt trips won't undo that level of investment." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But it might help Derek understand what he's really chosen." I turned back to my son, who was now crying openly while still holding the shotgun. "Derek, do you remember when you were 8 and you broke your mother's favorite vase? You were so afraid I'd be angry that you hid in your closet for 3 hours. Dad, stop. When I found you, you were crying just like this. And I told you that broken things could be fixed, that mistakes could be forgiven, but that lying about them made everything worse. This isn't the same thing, isn't it? You've made a terrible mistake, Derek. You've broken something precious. But it's not too late to stop making it worse." Derek was sobbing now, the shotgun wavering in his grip. James had apparently heard enough. He pulled out a pistol and pointed it at Derek. "If Derek won't follow through, I'll handle this myself," James said. "Derek can die with his father. Patricia and Michael can take the blame for killing the whole family." That's when Mrs. Campbell made her move. She'd been slowly edging toward a panel on the safe room wall while everyone was focused on Derek and me. Now she hit an emergency button that triggered multiple alarms throughout the house and automatically called the police and fire departments. "You clever woman!" James snarled, turning his gun toward her. "James, no!" William shouted. The gun went off just as Derek threw himself between James and Mrs. Campbell. The sound was deafening in the confined space. Derek hit the floor, blood spreading across his chest. "Derek! I dropped to my knees beside my son, pressing my hands against the wound. Derek looked up at me with eyes that were suddenly clear, the manipulation and anger stripped away by the reality of approaching death. "Dad," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't talk, son. Save your strength. Emma. Tell Emma I tried to be better at the end. You're going to tell her yourself. You're going to be fine." But Derek was already fading. The bullet had hit something vital, and there was too much blood. "I love you, Dad. I never stopped loving you." "I love you too, Derek. I always have." My son died in my arms while sirens wailed in the distance. James stood over us with his smoking gun and no trace of remorse on his face. "Well, that complicates things," he said calmly. "But we can work with it." Derek's heroic sacrifice to save Mrs. Campbell fits nicely into our narrative. I looked up at this monster who had manipulated my son into betrayal and then murdered him when he tried to redeem himself. "You're going to pay for this," I said quietly. "Actually, Frank, I'm going to inherit $40 million. James checked his watch. "And in about 10 minutes, when the police arrive, they're going to find Patricia and Michael holding smoking guns over your dead body and Derek's. Very tragic murder-suicide scenario." Through the monitor, we could see Patricia and Michael moving quickly through the house, setting up what looked like evidence of a violent confrontation. "The police will never believe it," Mrs. Campbell said, cradling her wounded arm where James's bullet had grazed her. "They'll believe what the evidence tells them, and the evidence will be very convincing." James smiled. "Patricia and Michael are professionals. They know how to stage a scene." David was checking something on his tablet. "Police ETA is 8 minutes. We need to move." "Agreed." James pointed his gun at me. "Frank, thank you for your service. You've been an excellent patsy." But as James prepared to shoot, William made his own desperate move. He lunged toward a final emergency switch on the safe room wall, one that Mrs. Campbell had apparently missed. The entire house suddenly filled with blinding strobe lights and a deafening alarm. It was a panic system designed to disorient intruders and signal for help. In the chaos of flashing lights and screaming alarms, I tackled James. We went down hard, his gun skittering across the floor. David moved to help James, but Mrs. Campbell tripped him with her cane, sending him crashing into the monitor bank. William, despite his weakness, was fighting with desperate strength born of guilt and grief. He'd realized, too late, that his son was a monster, and he was trying to atone for the years of creating and enabling that monster. The strobe lights made everything surreal, like fighting in a nightmare. I could hear shouting from upstairs as Patricia and Michael tried to figure out what was happening. James broke free from our struggle and scrambled for his gun. I dove after him, catching his wrist just as his fingers closed around the grip. We rolled across the floor, fighting for control of the weapon. James was younger and more desperate, but I was stronger from 40 years of physical labor and fueled by rage at my son's death. The gun went off twice, bullets embedding in the safe room walls. Then suddenly, the strobing stopped and normal lights came on. Police voices echoed through the house. "Police! House is surrounded. Come out with your hands visible." James made one final desperate attempt to shoot me. I caught his arm and slammed his hand against the concrete floor until he dropped the gun. "It's over, James," William said quietly. But James wasn't ready to accept defeat. He pulled a knife from his jacket and lunged toward Mrs. Campbell. "If I can't have the money, at least I can finish what I started," he snarled. I grabbed Derek's shotgun from where he'd dropped it and pulled the trigger. The blast caught James' center mass and threw him against the safe room wall. He slid to the floor, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "You," he gasped, "you actually shot me." "I've lost one son tonight," I said, standing over him with the smoking gun. "I'm not losing anyone else." James tried to speak again, but blood filled his mouth. He died with the same selfish surprise on his face that had characterized his entire adult life. David was on the floor, unconscious from his collision with the monitoring equipment. William sat in a chair, looking every one of his 76 years. Mrs. Campbell was crying, whether from relief or grief or the pain in her wounded arm, I couldn't tell. Above us, we could hear police taking Patricia and Michael into custody. Their protests of innocence were loud and indignant, but would be hard to maintain once investigators found the equipment they'd brought for staging our murders. "Frank," William said quietly, "I'm sorry. About Derek, about all of this. I never intended for your son to get hurt. I looked down at Derek's body, at my boy who died trying to save someone after months of planning to kill someone else. The good in him had won out at the end, but it was too late to save him. I know, I said. Derek made his own choices. Bad ones. But they were his to make. What will you tell Emma? Mrs. Campbell asked gently. I thought about my 10-year-old granddaughter, who would have to grow up knowing her father had died violently after betraying her grandfather. I'll tell her that her daddy made mistakes, but that he loved her and tried to do the right thing when it mattered. I knelt beside Derek's body and closed his eyes. I'll tell her that sometimes people we love disappoint us, but that doesn't mean they stop being people we love. The safe room door opened, and real police officers entered. Not actors, not conspirators, but genuine law enforcement officers who looked at the scene with professional competence and human sympathy. Sir, are you Frank Morrison? The lead officer asked. Yes. Your son Derek called our department yesterday with concerns about your safety. He gave us this address and asked us to check on you if he didn't contact us by tonight. I stared at the officer. Derek called you? He said he'd made a terrible mistake and was afraid you might be in danger because of it. He wanted to make sure someone was watching out for you. I looked down at Derek's body with new understanding. Even while planning my death, some part of him had been trying to save me. The phone call to police had been his insurance policy, his way of hedging his bets in case he couldn't go through with the murder. My son had been fighting with himself all along, and in the end, the good part of him had won. It wasn't enough to save his life, but it was enough to save his soul. 2 weeks later, I stood in the Colorado Springs police station, signing the last of the paperwork that would officially close the Hartwell case. Patricia and Michael had been charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and a dozen other crimes. David Thompson had survived his injuries and was facing federal charges for his role in multiple inheritance scams across several states. The real revelation had come when investigators examined James Hartwell's financial records. He'd been running inheritance cons for over a decade, targeting elderly men with substantial assets and using their own family members as unwitting accomplices. Derek had been just one of many sons, daughters, and relatives who'd been manipulated into betraying their own families for money they'd never actually received. Mr. Morrison? Detective Sarah Coleman looked up from her desk as I finished the paperwork. There's someone here who'd like to speak with you. A young woman in her early 30s entered the interview room, professionally dressed, with kind eyes and a nervous manner. Mr. Morrison, my name is Jennifer Walsh. My father was Robert Walsh. He died 3 years ago in what we thought was a burglary gone wrong. I sat down slowly, recognizing the look on her face. It was the same expression I saw in the mirror every morning since Derek's death. James Hartwell was involved? According to the FBI, yes. My father had remarried a woman named Caroline, and her brother had convinced my father to change his will. When my father started asking questions about missing money, he died in what police called a home invasion. Jennifer pulled out a folder of documents. The FBI says there are at least 12 other cases with similar patterns. Elderly men with assets, new wives or caregivers, family members who were manipulated into participating. How many family members? 7 sons, 3 daughters, 2 grandchildren. All of them were told stories about their elderly relatives being selfish or uncaring. All of them were offered money to participate in what they thought were harmless schemes to teach their relatives lessons about family loyalty. I thought about Derek's pain, his genuine belief that I had failed him as a father, and how that pain had been weaponized against both of us. What happened to them? The family members? 3 of them killed themselves when they realized what they'd done. 2 are in psychiatric treatment. The others are trying to rebuild their lives while living with the knowledge that they helped murder their own relatives. The weight of that information settled over me like a lead blanket. Derek and I had been just one small tragedy in a much larger pattern of family destruction. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you're the only family member who survived. You're the only one who can speak for all of us. Jennifer's voice was steady but emotional. The FBI is building cases against James's other associates, but they need someone who understands the full scope of what these people did to families like ours. I thought about Derek dying in my arms, about Mrs. Campbell mourning a boy who'd never actually died, about William learning that his son had become a monster. What would you need me to do? Testify. Tell the court what it's like to be manipulated into betraying someone you love. Help judges and juries understand that the family members were victims too, not willing conspirators. I looked at Jennifer Walsh's earnest face and saw something I recognized. The need to make meaning from senseless loss, to find purpose in the wreckage of destroyed families. I'll do it, I said. 1 month later, I was sitting in a federal courthouse in Denver, listening to prosecutors lay out the scope of James Hartwell's network. The courtroom was packed with family members of victims, sons and daughters who'd lost parents, grandchildren who'd lost grandparents, and relatives who'd been manipulated into participating in murders they never understood they were committing. When my turn came to testify, I looked out at that crowd of grieving, guilty faces and spoke directly to them rather than to the jury. My son Derek was a good man who made terrible choices because someone convinced him that his father didn't love him enough, I said. Derek died believing that he was protecting himself from a lifetime of disappointment, when actually he was protecting a stranger's access to money that Derek would never have seen. I talked about the months of manipulation, about how James's organization had researched our family's vulnerabilities and exploited them with surgical precision. They didn't just steal money, I testified. They stole relationships. They took families who loved each other but had normal problems, normal disappointments, normal struggles, and they weaponized those struggles to turn us against each other. During a break in the proceedings, a woman approached me in the courthouse hallway. Mr. Morrison, I'm Linda Martinez, Derek's ex-wife. I turned to face the woman who'd been married to my son, who'd taken Emma away from him, who'd contributed to the loneliness and resentment that had made Derek vulnerable to James's manipulation. Linda, I wanted you to know that Derek called me the night before he died. He told me he'd made terrible mistakes and asked if he could see Emma one more time to apologize for being a bad father. I felt my throat tighten. What did you tell him? I told him no. I told him he'd already hurt Emma enough by being unreliable and inconsistent. Linda was crying now. I told him that maybe it was better if he just stayed away permanently. The cruelty of that timing was breathtaking. Derek had died believing that even his daughter was better off without him. Linda, I had no idea what he was going through. If I'd known someone was manipulating him, threatening him, playing on his guilt about being a divorced father. She wiped her eyes. I would have let him see Emma. I would have tried to help. I looked at this woman, another victim of James's network, another person carrying guilt for choices made without complete information. It's not your fault, I said. None of us knew what we were really dealing with. I've been telling Emma stories about her daddy. Good stories, about how much he loved her, about how he was trying to be a better person. Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't want her to grow up thinking her father was a bad man. He wasn't a bad man. He was a confused man who got used by people who were very good at using confusion against people. Linda nodded, then hesitated. Mr. Morrison, Emma would like to meet you. She doesn't really remember having a grandfather, but she'd like to know Derek's father. The idea of meeting my granddaughter both terrified and thrilled me. Emma was the only family I had left, the only piece of Derek that would continue into the future. I'd like that very much, I said. 3 months after the trial, I was sitting in a park in Portland, Oregon, watching a 10-year-old girl with Derek's eyes and Sarah's smile feed ducks at a pond. Emma had been shy at first, but children are remarkably adaptable, and she'd quickly warmed to having a grandfather who actually wanted to spend time with her. Grandpa Frank, she said, settling beside me on the park bench. Mom says Daddy did something bad, but that he was sorry about it. That's right. What did he do? I'd been dreading this question for months, knowing that Emma deserved the truth, but struggling to find an age-appropriate way to explain complex adult betrayal. Your daddy got confused about whether people loved him, I said carefully. Some bad people convinced him that his family didn't care about him, and that made him make choices that hurt people. Did he hurt you? Yes, but he was sorry about it, and he tried to fix it before he died. Emma considered this with the seriousness that children bring to important topics. Do you forgive him? I do, because I understand that he was scared and confused, and because he loved you very much. How do you know he loved me? Because the last thing he said before he died was that he wanted me to tell you he tried to be better at the end. Emma nodded solemnly. That's what Mom said, too. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the ducks and enjoying the Oregon sunshine. Linda had remarried a kind man named Robert, who treated Emma like his own daughter, and they'd welcomed me into their extended family with warmth I didn't deserve, but deeply appreciated. Grandpa Frank? Yes? Are you going to stay in Portland, or do you have to go back to Colorado? It was a question I'd been grappling with for weeks. My apartment in Colorado Springs felt empty and pointless now. Derek was buried there, but Derek wasn't really there anymore. Emma was here, alive and growing and in need of family connections that would help her understand where she came from. What would you like me to do? I'd like you to stay. Robert says you could get an apartment near us, and Mom says you could come to my school plays and stuff. The simple innocence of that request nearly broke my heart. Here was a child offering unconditional love to a grandfather she barely knew, simply because family was supposed to love each other. I think I'd like that very much. 6 months later, I was living in a small apartment 2 blocks from Emma's house, working part-time as a construction supervisor for a non-profit that built affordable housing for low-income families. The work was meaningful. The pace was manageable for a man my age, and it kept me close to Emma, while giving me purpose beyond just being someone's grandfather. Mrs. Campbell had recovered from her injuries and moved to Denver to be closer to her own family. William Hartwell had donated his entire fortune to victims' families and was living quietly in a small house, trying to make peace with the knowledge that he'd raised a son capable of such evil. On Emma's 11th birthday, I gave her a photo album I'd put together. Pictures of Derek as a boy, stories about his mother, images of the grandparents she'd never really known. We sat together on her bed, going through the pages while I told her stories about her father's childhood. He wanted to be a photographer, I told her, showing her some of Derek's old pictures. He had a really good eye for finding beauty in ordinary things. Like what? Like this. I showed her a picture Derek had taken when he was 16, a construction worker sitting on a beam high above the city, eating lunch and watching the sunset. That's pretty, Emma said. Is that you? I looked at the photo more carefully. Derek had captured me during one of my rare breaks, sitting 30 stories above Colorado Springs, taking a moment to appreciate the view instead of focusing on the work. Yes, that's me. I didn't know he was taking pictures. He thought you looked, what's the word, majestic. I stared at that old photo, seeing myself through Derek's eyes for the first time. Not the demanding, practical father I'd thought I was, but someone worth capturing in a moment of quiet dignity. How do you know what he thought? Emma pulled out her own phone and showed me a folder of photos. Mom saved all his pictures on the cloud. There are hundreds of them, and lots of them are of you. I scrolled through Derek's digital gallery with growing amazement. Picture after picture of me working, picture of me reading, laughing with Sarah, playing with baby Emma. All taken without my knowledge, all showing a version of myself I'd never seen. Emma, these are beautiful. Derek thought you were beautiful too. He wrote little stories about some of the pictures. She opened one image, a photo of me teaching teenage Derek how to use a power saw, and showed me the attached note, Dad showing me how to be safe with dangerous tools. He always worried about me getting hurt, even when I was being reckless. I didn't appreciate it then, but I understand now that worry is just love wearing a hard hat. I stared at those words, Derek's words, written years before our relationship fell apart, expressing appreciation I'd never heard him voice out loud. There are more, Emma said gently. We spent the next hour going through Derek's secret collection of family photographs and the stories he'd written about them. Picture after picture showed moments I'd forgotten or overlooked. Times when I'd been a better father than I'd realized. Times when Derek had felt loved and supported, even if he'd never said so. The last photo in the collection was taken on Emma's 2nd birthday, just a few months before Sarah died. It showed me holding Emma while she blew out candles. My face lit up with pure joy at being her grandfather. Derek's note read, Dad with Emma on her birthday. He loves her more than anything in the world, just like he loved me. I hope she never forgets how it feels to be loved like that. I closed the phone and looked at my granddaughter, this precious child who'd given me back my son's love just when I thought I'd lost it forever. Emma, thank you for showing me this. Does it make you sad? It makes me grateful. Grateful for the time I had with your daddy, and grateful for the time I have with you. Emma hugged me tightly. I'm grateful too, Grandpa Frank, for you and for Daddy's pictures. and for knowing that love doesn't stop even when people make mistakes. Out of the mouths of babes. On the first anniversary of Derek's death, I drove from Portland back to Colorado Springs to visit his grave. Emma had wanted to come with me, but Linda and I agreed that 11 was still too young for that kind of emotional pilgrimage. Instead, Emma had written a letter to her father, which I carried in my jacket pocket along with a small photo album of her recent achievements. The cemetery was exactly as I remembered. Quiet, well-maintained, with Derek's headstone standing under the oak tree where I'd buried him next to his mother. The engraving read simply, "Derek James Morrison, beloved son and father, lost but not forgotten." I sat on the bench facing their graves and pulled out Emma's letter. "Dear Daddy," I read aloud. "Grandpa Frank says you can hear us when we visit, so I wanted to tell you about 5th grade. I'm really good at math, and I'm learning to play piano. Mom says I have your artistic eye, whatever that means." A light breeze rustled the leaves above me, and I continued reading. "Grandpa Frank lives near us now, and he comes to my school plays and soccer games. He's teaching me how to use tools safely, just like he taught you. He says you would be proud of how responsible I am with the power drill." I smiled at that. Emma had indeed shown remarkable aptitude for construction work during our weekend building projects. "I want you to know that I understand about the mistakes you made. Grandpa Frank explained that some bad people tricked you into thinking your family didn't love you. That must have been really scary and confusing. I forgive you for being confused, and I want you to know that I love you, even though I don't remember you very well." I had to pause in my reading, overwhelmed by the generosity of spirit this child had inherited from both her parents. "Mom says you took pictures of everything because you wanted to remember all the good moments. I do that too now. I take pictures of Grandpa Frank working, and of Mom and Robert laughing, and of my friends at school. I think maybe remembering good things is like a superpower that runs in our family." The letter continued for 2 more pages, full of 11-year-old observations about life and death and family and forgiveness. When I finished reading it, I folded it carefully and placed it on Derek's grave, weighted down with a small stone Emma had painted with the words, "Love always." "She's remarkable, son," I said to the headstone. "You and Linda did good work with her, even if you couldn't see it at the time." I opened Emma's photo album and showed the pictures to Derek's grave. Emma at her piano recital, Emma building a birdhouse in my garage, Emma graduating from 5th grade with honors. She wants to be an architect when she grows up. Says she wants to design buildings that help people feel safe and happy. I turned to a picture of Emma wearing my old hard hat while we worked on a Habitat for Humanity house. "I think she gets that from you. The desire to create things that matter." A young woman approached across the cemetery, carrying flowers and walking toward a grave several rows away. As she passed, she paused and looked at me sitting by Derek's headstone. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Are you Frank Morrison?" I looked up, surprised. "Yes. My name is Rebecca Thompson. You testified at the trial about James Hartwell and the inheritance fraud network." I recognized her now, one of the family members who'd been manipulated into participating in their relatives' murders. "Rebecca, how are you doing?" "Some days better than others." She gestured to the flowers she was carrying. "I'm here visiting my grandfather. He died because I helped someone poison him, thinking I was teaching him a lesson about his selfishness. I'm sorry for your loss. I wanted to thank you for what you said in court, about how we were victims too, not just accomplices." Rebecca sat down on the bench beside me. "The judge gave me community service instead of prison time, partly because of your testimony." "What kind of community service?" "I work with elder abuse prevention programs now, teaching people how to recognize scams, how to protect elderly relatives from predators." Rebecca's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I figure if I can't bring my grandfather back, at least I can try to protect other people's grandfathers." I thought about that. Turning personal tragedy into public service, using the worst experience of your life to prevent others from having similar experiences. That's meaningful work. It helps me sleep at night, knowing that something good might come from something so terrible. Rebecca looked at Derek's headstone. "Was this your son?" "Yes. He was manipulated into participating in a plot to kill me. He died trying to protect someone else. I'm sorry. I know how complicated the grief is when someone you love dies after making terrible choices." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people who understood the particular pain of loving someone who'd betrayed you. Mr. Morrison, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you forgive them? How do you move past the anger and the hurt? I thought about Derek dying in my arms, about his final words of love and regret, about Emma's letter full of understanding and acceptance. I think forgiveness isn't something you achieve once, I said slowly. It's something you choose to do every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Some days I'm angrier at Derek than others. Some days I miss him more than I can bear. But you don't hate him? I hate what he did. I hate the people who manipulated him into doing it. But Derek himself? I touched his headstone gently. He was my son. He made terrible choices, but he was still the little boy I taught to ride a bicycle, and the young man who took beautiful photographs, and the father who loved his daughter more than his own life. Rebecca nodded slowly. My grandfather used to say that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. Wise man. I just wish I'd remembered that before I helped kill him. After Rebecca left to visit her grandfather's grave, I remained on the bench watching the afternoon light filter through the oak leaves. I thought about forgiveness, about family, about the choices we make and the prices we pay for them. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Grandpa Frank, Mom says you're visiting Daddy today and that I miss him. Will you tell him about my piano recital? Back. Already told him. He's proud of you. I'll be home tomorrow for dinner. Home. When had I started thinking of Portland as home instead of Colorado Springs? Another text from Linda. Frank, Robert got a job offer in Seattle. Better position, better pay. We wanted to talk to you about moving before we make any decisions. I stared at that message, immediately feeling the familiar fear of abandonment and loss. Emma and Linda's family were the only real connections I had left. The thought of them moving away brought back all the loneliness and isolation I'd felt before Derek's death brought us together. But then I looked at Derek's grave, at the evidence of what fear and selfishness could do to families, and made a conscious choice. I typed back, "That's wonderful news. Seattle is beautiful, and you should take opportunities that help your family thrive. I'll figure out my own next steps." The response came quickly. "We want you to come with us, Frank." Emma specifically requested that we not move anywhere without Grandpa Frank. "You're part of our family now." I sat in that cemetery, surrounded by the dead, but connected to the living, and felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's death 15 years earlier. The certainty that I was loved unconditionally by people who chose to include me in their lives not because they had to, but because they wanted to. 3 months later, I was standing on a construction site in Seattle, wearing a hard hat and supervising the building of a new community center in a low-income neighborhood. The work was challenging, the purpose was clear, and the pay was enough to support a comfortable retirement in a city where I could see my granddaughter regularly. Emma joined me on the construction site after school that day, wearing her own small hard hat and carrying her camera, a birthday gift I'd given her to encourage her interest in Derek's artistic legacy. "Grandpa Frank, can you teach me about that crane?" "That's a tower crane, and it's not something you operate without years of training and certification," I said automatically, then caught myself repeating the same practical lectures I'd given Derek 30 years earlier. "But you could teach me the basics? Just so I understand how it works?" I looked at my granddaughter's eager face and made a different choice than I'd made with her father. "Absolutely. And if you're really interested, we can look into summer programs for kids who want to learn about construction and engineering." Emma's smile was radiant. "Really? You wouldn't tell me I should focus on something more practical?" "Emma, practical skills are important, but so is following your interests and developing your talents. Your father was artistic and creative, and that was a gift, not a problem to be solved." "Did you tell him that when he was alive?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "No, I didn't, and that was one of my mistakes as a father." "But you're telling me." "I'm telling you because I learned from my mistakes with your dad. I learned that supporting someone's dreams doesn't make them impractical. It makes them happy." Emma took a picture of me explaining the crane operations, then showed me the image on her camera's screen. "You look proud, Grandpa Frank." "I am proud. Of you, of this work, of the life we're building together. Daddy would like this, wouldn't he? You and me working together, building things that help people." I looked at the community center rising around us, a place where children would learn and play, where families would gather, where a neighborhood would have something beautiful and functional to call their own. Yes, Emma, I think your daddy would like this very much. That evening, in my new apartment with a view of Puget Sound and photos of Emma covering my refrigerator, I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Rebecca Thompson and the other family members I'd met through the victim support groups. I've been thinking about what we discussed regarding turning our experiences into something positive, I wrote. I'm wondering if there might be value in starting a foundation, something that provides support for families who've been torn apart by inheritance fraud, elder abuse, and similar crimes. I described my idea, a nonprofit that would provide counseling, legal support, and financial assistance to families dealing with the aftermath of betrayal and loss. A place where people could find community with others who understood the complicated grief of loving someone who'd hurt them. We could call it the Second Chances Foundation, I wrote, because everyone deserves the opportunity to rebuild after tragedy, and because redemption is possible even after terrible mistakes. Within a week, I had responses from 12 people interested in helping establish the foundation. Within a month, we had filed paperwork and begun fundraising. Within 6 months, we were providing services to families across 3 states. Emma designed our logo, a simple image of a bridge connecting 2 sides of a river, with the words, "Love endures" underneath. Because that's what you taught me, Grandpa Frank, she explained. That love doesn't stop even when people make mistakes, and that we can build bridges to connect with each other even after trust gets broken. Standing in my Seattle apartment, looking at that logo designed by my 11-year-old granddaughter, I realized that Derek's death had not been meaningless after all. His tragedy had led to Emma's wisdom, to the Second Chances Foundation, to my own transformation from a bitter, lonely retiree into someone who helped families heal from betrayal and loss. Derek had died believing he was protecting himself from disappointment. Instead, his death had taught all of us about the power of unconditional love, the possibility of redemption, and the importance of building connections rather than walls. It wasn't the life any of us had planned, but it was a life with meaning, purpose, and hope. And sometimes that's enough. 2 years later, I stood in the ballroom of a Seattle hotel, watching Emma, now 13 and startlingly grown up, address an audience of over 300 people at the Second Chances Foundation's annual fundraising gala. She was introducing a video tribute to Derek and the other family members who had died as a result of James Hartwell's manipulation network. My father made terrible mistakes because someone convinced him that love was conditional, that family could be traded for money, that forgiveness wasn't possible, Emma said into the microphone with poise that would have made Derek proud. But his story didn't end with those mistakes. It ended with him choosing to protect someone else, choosing love over selfishness, at the cost of his own life. The ballroom was quiet. Hundreds of people listening to a teenager explain concepts about betrayal and redemption that most adults struggled to understand. The Second Chances Foundation exists because my grandfather refused to let my father's death be meaningless. He chose to build something good from something terrible. He chose to help other families avoid the pain that destroyed ours. In the audience, I could see Rebecca Thompson, now the Foundation's Director of Family Counseling Services, wiping away tears. Beside her sat Mrs. Campbell, who had become our volunteer coordinator and Emma's unofficial grandmother. William Hartwell was in the back row, looking frail but determined. He'd donated $500,000 to the foundation and spent his remaining years trying to atone for raising a son who'd caused so much destruction. But the most important thing my grandfather taught me, Emma continued, is that love doesn't end when people die, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means choosing to build something better from the pieces of what got broken. The video began playing on screens around the ballroom, a tribute to Derek, to the other manipulated family members, and to the work of healing that had grown from their tragedies. I watched images of our construction projects flash by. Community centers, affordable housing developments, therapeutic gardens designed specifically for families dealing with trauma and loss. When Emma's speech was finished, she found me in the crowd and hugged me tightly. "How did I do, Grandpa Frank?" "You were perfect, sweetheart. Your father would have been so proud." "I know. I can feel him sometimes, you know. When I'm doing something good, something that helps people. I think he's happy that his mistakes turned into something meaningful. Linda and Robert approached us, beaming with pride. Over the past 3 years, they'd become true family to me. Not just Emma's parents, but my daughter and son-in-law in every way that mattered. Frank, Linda said, the Foundation Board wants to discuss expanding the Seattle programs. Are you up for taking on more construction projects? At 65, I was supposedly nearing retirement age again. But the work we were doing felt too important to abandon, and I was healthier and more energetic than I'd been in decades. What kind of projects? Transitional housing for families who've lost their homes due to financial exploitation. Therapeutic workshop spaces for people learning to rebuild trust. A memorial garden for victims of family betrayal crimes. I looked around the ballroom at all the people who'd found community and purpose through the foundation. Families who'd been torn apart by manipulation and fraud, now working together to prevent others from experiencing similar tragedies. When do we start? Tomorrow, Robert said with a grin. I've got the permits, Emma's got the design concepts, and Mrs. Campbell's got a crew of volunteers ready to begin site preparation. After the gala, I walked alone through downtown Seattle, thinking about the strange path that had led me from a construction site in Colorado Springs to a foundation ballroom in Washington. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Morrison, this is Detective Coleman from Colorado Springs PD. I wanted to let you know that the last of James Hartwell's associates was sentenced today. The network is completely dismantled. Derek's case is officially closed. I stopped walking and leaned against a building, feeling the weight of that closure. For 3 years, legal proceedings had kept Derek's death an open wound. Now, finally, the justice system had finished its work. I typed back, "Thank you for letting me know. Derek would be glad that no other families will be hurt by these people." Mr. Morrison, Sir, if I may say so, your son's story has become required reading at our academy. We teach new officers about the signs of family manipulation and elder abuse. Derek's death has probably saved more lives than we'll ever know. I walked the rest of the way home with a sense of completion I hadn't felt since that terrible night in William Hartwell's safe room. Derek's story was finished now. Not with his death, but with the work that had grown from it. At my apartment, I found Emma sitting at my kitchen table, working on homework, while Mrs. Campbell prepared tea. "Grandpa Frank," Emma said without looking up from her algebra. "I've been thinking about college applications. You're 13. College is still 4 years away." "I know. But I want to study architecture and nonprofit management so I can take over the foundation someday." Emma looked up with Derek's serious eyes. "Unless you think that's impractical." I sat down beside her and looked at her homework. Not just algebra, but sketches of building designs in the margins, notes about sustainable construction materials, and a rough draft of what looked like a business plan. "Emma, that's the most practical plan I've ever heard. The foundation will need someone who understands both construction and management. You'd be perfect for that role." "Really? You don't think I should focus on something more stable? I think you should focus on something that matters to you and helps other people. Everything else is just details we can figure out along the way." Mrs. Campbell set tea in front of us and sat down with her own cup. "Emma, dear, your grandfather has learned a great deal about supporting other people's dreams." "What do you mean?" "He means that I spent too many years trying to make your father practical instead of helping him be himself." I touched the sketches in Emma's notebook. "I won't make that mistake with you." Emma beamed at me. "So you'll help me learn about foundation work and construction management." "Emma, I'll teach you everything I know, and then we'll learn the rest together." That night, after Emma and Mrs. Campbell had gone home, I sat in my living room looking out at Puget Sound and thinking about the concept of second chances. 3 years ago, I'd been a bitter, lonely retiree whose son had abandoned him at an airport. Tonight, I was a grandfather, a foundation director, and a man whose work had meaning beyond his own survival. Derek's betrayal had led to my connection with William Hartwell. William's deception had led to exposing James's murder network. James's crimes had led to the foundation and the healing work we did for other families. Every disaster had become a doorway, every ending a new beginning. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Linda's number. "Frank? I'm sorry to call so late, but Emma wanted me to ask you something." "What's that?" "She wants to know if you'd consider legally adopting her. Not to replace Derek as her father, but to make sure you're officially her grandfather and can make medical decisions if something happens to Robert and me. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Linda, I would be honored. She also wants to know if you'd be willing to take her to visit Derek's grave this summer. She's ready to meet her father now, she says. I thought about that cemetery in Colorado Springs, about Derek's headstone under the oak tree, about all the conversations I'd had with him there over the past 3 years. I think that's a wonderful idea. Derek would love to meet the remarkable young woman his daughter has become. After the call, I pulled out a photo album Emma had given me for Father's Day. Pictures of our construction projects, family dinners, Emma's school events, and quiet moments reading together. In every image, I could see the contentment that had gradually replaced the bitterness I'd carried for so many years. The last photo in the album was one Linda had taken without my knowledge. Emma and me working on a Habitat for Humanity house, both wearing hard hats, both concentrating on our work with identical expressions of focused determination. Emma had written a caption below the picture. Grandpa Frank teaching me that love is something you build, not something you find. Thank you for showing me how to turn broken things into beautiful things. I closed the album and looked out at the city lights reflecting on the water. Somewhere in those lights were the community centers we'd built, the families we'd helped, the lives that had been changed by choosing connection over isolation, forgiveness over resentment, building over destruction. Derek had died believing that love was conditional, that family was transactional. That disappointment was inevitable. Emma was growing up knowing that love endures, that family is chosen as much as inherited, that hope is something you create through your actions rather than something you wait to receive. That transformation, from Derek's despair to Emma's wisdom, was the real inheritance he'd left behind. Not money or property, but the knowledge that even our worst mistakes can become the foundation for someone else's best choices. At 65, I was finally learning what my own father had tried to teach me through 40 years of hard work. That the measure of a life isn't what you accumulate, but what you build for others to inherit. Emma would inherit a foundation, a community, and the knowledge that she was loved unconditionally by people who chose to include her in their lives. Derek would be proud. I was going to spend the rest of my years making sure of that. Tomorrow, I would begin designing the memorial garden, where families could honor relatives they'd lost to betrayal and manipulation. Emma would help with the design, Mrs. Campbell would coordinate the volunteers, and Rebecca would ensure that the space served the therapeutic needs of grieving families. It would be beautiful, functional, and healing, just like the life we'd built from the wreckage of Derek's mistakes, just like the love that had survived everything.